So we've got some new information today in regards to Final Fantasy XVI. We've got a statement from Yoshi P about the game going gold, which is astoundingly quick. And then we do have a PlayStation blog that dropped earlier today with the game's director Hiroshi Takai, where they talk more about the power of the PlayStation 5, but more interestingly, they talk a lot about the controller, the PlayStation 5 DualSense Controller, and all the really cool stuff they can do with that piece of hardware. So starting first, the game has gone gold, and Genki on Twitter has provided us with the translation from Yoshi P himself in regards to the game's state of quality right now. He says, Yoshi P said he heard from the Final Fantasy XVI producer, Yoshi P, which inside joke there, Yoshi P is the producer of Final Fantasy XVI as well as Final Fantasy XIV, and lately he's been referencing each director like they're two separate entities even though he's the same guy. So just to clear that up. But he said that they worked hard until the end debugging Final Fantasy XVI. He said that no game has no bugs at all, but as much as possible they don't really want to be in a situation where the game requires patches, so they worked hard on bug fixing, which says a lot. First off, Yoshi P is a stickler for releasing great quality games. He wants to make sure that he puts his best foot forward and that this product comes out as best as it possibly can. And a lot of us thought this game was going to come out last year because it looked so polished, but we got that release date update and found out it wasn't coming out until the summer of this year. So it's pretty clear that they spent a very long time really polishing this game and looking for any bugs as possible, so that way when it does come out, they won't require a day one patch. Now again, that doesn't mean that the game will be completely bug-free. Once you get it out into people's hands, they're going to start to discover stuff that just kind of slipped through the cracks. But you know, with that, they can release day one patches to help clean up and iron out any bugs. And this is another situation where I think Yoshi P is really feeling the pressure. There is a lot riding on not only his shoulders, but this game's shoulders. He's coming off of Final Fantasy XIV, which was incredibly horrible when it launched, but he was able to go in there and really turn things around, and it's now, if I'm not mistaken, still the most popular MMO out there. So a lot of that had to do with him. And he's said in previous interviews before that he really wants Final Fantasy to be up there in that upper echelon of gaming where, you know, a game comes out and a month after its release, it's sold like 10 to 12 million units. You look at games like God of War Ragnarok, which sold 10 million after its first month of release. Elden Ring, I think, went on to sell like 15 million copies. Resident Evil 4 recently sold 3 million copies in 2 days. So he really wants Final Fantasy to be up in that upper echelon to where it's respected, renowned, and it's super successful. So I think he's feeling that pressure a little bit. So there's a lot riding on his shoulders, but the game's shoulders as well, to make sure it comes out and it performs as best as possible, not just in terms of its tech, but in terms of the financial aspect as well. So let's go ahead and move over to that PlayStation blog interview. Again, a lot of it really talks about, you know, the power of the PlayStation 5 and just reiterating those things, but I wanted to single out the conversation about the DualSense controller in particular, because that controller is astoundingly crazy. So PlayStation blog goes on to say, could you explain a little bit about how Final Fantasy XVI makes use of the PS5 DualSense controller's adaptive triggers and haptic feedback in battle and exploration? Takai goes on to say, there are certain sections where the player will have to open heavy doors or lift up portcullises, and we use the adaptive triggers there to put across that feeling of effort and resistance. They're also used when riding chocobos. The haptic feedback can produce extremely subtle vibrations, which we use to create a heightened feeling of presence in cutscenes. We converted the sound effects used in each scene into haptic data, which lets us portray details that we've never been able to before, like the movements of the air. And that to me sounds super exciting. Now, the DualSense controller, it's not for everybody. Physically, it's not the most comfortable controller to hold, but the tech aspect of it is really astonishing. So hearing that they've somehow managed to take sound and make it into a physical touch sensation with that controller is really cool, and I can't wait to experience that. And for some developers, they just kind of half-ass the DualSense stuff and they throw in maybe some resistance here in the triggers, but they don't really take full advantage of the triggers as well as the haptic feedback and the game's built-in microphone and speaker, which a game like Ghost of Tsushima, that is a really cool example of what the DualSense is really capable of. And something that might seem minor to people, but in that game, the wind is incredibly important. So when you swipe on your DualSense pad, it shows you which direction to go, and you can feel that in the controller. You feel the wind moving through the controller. Another really cool, interesting aspect is when you're riding around on your horse, the ground feels different in the controller depending on the surface you're on. I know it sounds nuts, and it really is one of those things that you have to experience to really fully appreciate and understand it. But riding your horse through grass feels entirely different than walking on sand or walking on stone or walking up a mountain. It's insane how they get this stuff to work. And there's moments in the game too where you're using a grappling hook and you need to make a pathway for yourself, so you attach it to this piece of wood and you're pulling it, and you really feel the resistance in those triggers and in the controller. It's a really crazy thing to try to explain to people, but it is really cool. Another game that takes advantage of it is Horizon Forbidden West. One of my favorite things is using the bow and arrow in that game, and you feel every bit of force as you draw your bow and pull that bowstring back to launch your arrow. And one of the most satisfying, and this is maybe a bit disturbing, features in Horizon Forbidden West is landing a headshot on a human enemy with an arrow, because you feel this satisfying crunch through the controller, but that crunch noise also plays through the game's speakers, and it's really gnarly to experience on your own when you're playing that game. So I'm really curious to see what else they do with this game. I'm wondering if it's not just an air sensation, but using magic, for example, might feel different. Each spell could have its own unique feel and sound coming from the controller. Maybe getting damaged by Garuda feels different than taking damage from someone like Bahamut or Odin. So this is one of the benefits of the game being exclusive. And we learned recently that it's not just a money-hatting situation where Sony's throwing money at them. They actively stepped in to help with developing this game as well as optimizing, because who better to help you make a PlayStation 5 game than the Sony Interactive engineers who built the damn console. So they were able to come in and really help Square get this game to be as polished as it could be. And it's honestly a situation where even though it's a third-party game, it's receiving first-party treatment. So it's going to be really cool and interesting to see how these technical aspects play out in Final Fantasy XVI. And then for the very end, they ask Hiroshi Takai what other PlayStation 5 games have impressed you, and he responds with God of War Ragnarok. He says, "It's a seamless experience from beginning to end and paints a perfect picture of the relationship between a father and his son." So we've seen God of War Ragnarok come up many times before as a game that really inspired this team when they were making Final Fantasy XVI. So these big, huge action set pieces you have in God of War are gorgeous. It's a one-take game, so there's no cutaways that fade out and fade in. It's literally from beginning to end, you're playing it constantly, and it's really cool. So that's the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of the technical aspect of Final Fantasy XVI, and what do you think of that DualSense controller? Do you think it's going to be really cool as they're saying, or is it going to be one of those things where you play with it for like a couple of minutes and then you just turn it off to experience the game with a normal controller? I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.